Deep in the Amazon rainforest, 1,000 miles up a river, there is a street that does not belong there. It is a proper American street. There are wooden houses with front porches and peeling white paint. There are fire hydrants standing in the weeds. There is a great rusting water tower leaning over the trees, and the shell of a red brick hospital, and a cracked concrete swimming pool with a jungle vine hanging into it. If you did not know better, you would swear a small town from the American Midwest had been picked up whole, carried across the sea, and set down in the middle of the rainforest, and then left there to rot. And that is almost exactly what happened. Because 100 years ago, the richest man in the world looked at a map of the Amazon, drew a circle on it the size of a small country, and decided to build a piece of America inside it. He never came to see it. He never set foot in Brazil at all. He simply sent his money and his engineers and his rules and his enormous certainty up that river to grow rubber and to teach the jungle a lesson. The jungle taught him one instead. My name is Joaquim. For close to 40 years, I stood at a blackboard in Brazil and tried to make the history of my country come alive for children who would much rather have been outside. And of all the stories I ever told, this was the one that made them lean forward every single time, because it sounds like a tall tale, and it is not. Every strange word of it is true. So pour yourself something to drink and pull up a chair, and let me tell you about the day Henry Ford decided to conquer the Amazon, and about who, in the end, conquered whom. To understand how a slice of Michigan ended up dying in the rainforest, you have to understand the man who put it there. In the 1920s, Henry Ford was not simply rich. He was something the world had never quite seen before. He had taken the automobile, which had been a toy for the wealthy, and with his assembly line and his Model T, he had made it something an ordinary family could own. He had broken the work of building a car into tiny, repeatable steps, so that a man who knew almost nothing could stand in one spot and do one motion over and over, and out the other end came a machine. He had, in a real sense, invented the modern factory, and it had made him one of the most powerful men on earth. His face was known everywhere. His opinions were printed in the newspapers as though they were law. When Henry Ford said a thing could be done, the world had learned to assume it could be done, because he had a long, dazzling record of doing the very things that everyone else had sworn were impossible. That is a dangerous kind of success to have. It teaches a man that the word impossible is only ever the excuse of smaller minds, and it leaves him with no way to tell the difference between a wall he can push through and a wall that no amount of pushing will ever move. Now, a man who builds cars needs one thing that no factory can manufacture. He needs rubber. Rubber for the tires, rubber for the hoses, the gaskets, the seals. A car is held together and cushioned by the stuff. And here was the thorn in Henry Ford's side. Nearly all the world's rubber in those days came from plantations on the far side of the planet, in the colonies of British and Dutch empires in Southeast Asia, and those empires had learned to work together to hold back the supply and keep the price high. To a self-made American who hated being told what anything should cost, this was intolerable. He was being taxed, as he saw it, by foreign lords who grew a plant he could surely grow himself. And here is the delicious irony at the very heart of this story, the thing that made Ford so sure he was right. The rubber tree is not Asian at all. It is Brazilian. The tree they call Hevea, the one that weeps the white sap that becomes rubber, is a native of the Amazon rainforest. It grew there, wild, long before anyone thought to plant it in rows. For a golden few decades, Brazil had been the rubber capital of the world. Fortunes were made in the jungle. An opera house rose in the city of Manaus, deep in the Amazon, so that rubber barons could hear singers brought all the way from Europe. The stories from those years are almost too much to believe. They say the rubber barons sent their laundry to Portugal to be washed and starched, and lit their cigars with banknotes, and watered their horses on French champagne, in a city 1,000 miles up a river in the middle of the rainforest. A student of mine once put up his hand and asked me, "Professor, if Brazil had all the rubber and all the money, how did it lose all of it?" And that, I told him, is exactly the right question, because the answer is a single quiet act that changed the fate of 2 continents. And then Brazil lost it. The way the story is usually told, an Englishman named Henry Wickham carried thousands of rubber seeds out of the Amazon in the 1870s, off to the greenhouses of London. Some say smuggled, though honestly, how much was theft and how much was simply allowed is a thing historians still argue about. But the seeds got out, and from those seeds grew the great plantations of Asia, in Malaya, in Ceylon, in the Dutch East Indies, orderly, endless, efficient, which flooded the world with cheap rubber and left the Brazilian jungle behind almost overnight. Manaus fell as fast as it had risen. The Grand Opera House went quiet, the barons scattered, and the rainforest began patiently to take its city back. So you can see how the idea must have glittered in Henry Ford's mind. The rubber tree is Brazilian. The Asians only borrowed it. Why should he pay their price when he could go to the tree's own homeland and simply grow it where it came from? What could be more natural than that? Hold on to that question. What could be more natural than that? Because the answer is the whole tragedy, and it is hiding in plain sight. In 1927, Ford's company struck a deal with the Brazilian state of Pará in the north on the Amazon. And it was not a modest deal. Brazil granted the Ford Motor Company a concession of land along a river called the Tapajos, a great tributary of the Amazon, that ran to something like 2.5 million acres. 2.5 million. A private holding, handed to an American car company, the size of a small country, in exchange for a share of the profits that everyone assumed would come pouring out. On the maps in the newspapers it looked like genius. A rubber empire of Ford's own in the tree's own backyard, free of the British and the Dutch forever. And the man himself, the man whose name would be stamped on the whole endeavor, Henry Ford, never went. Not once. He never traveled to Brazil, never stood on the land he had bought, never felt the heat or heard the river or looked a single one of his workers in the eye. He ran his jungle from an office in Michigan, thousands of miles away, from photographs and reports and the assurances of managers. He was so certain he understood the problem that he did not feel the need to look at it. And I want you to notice that, because in a way it is the deepest thing in the whole story. He had conquered so much by standardizing everything he touched that he no longer believed a place could have anything to teach him. So they went up the river to build. And what they built was not really a plantation at all. It was a town, a whole American town, hauled piece by piece up the Amazon. They shipped the machinery, the sawmill, the generators, the pipes, sometimes the very lumber. They cut the clearing out of the forest, and inside it they laid out streets on a grid, the way you would in Ohio. They built wooden houses with peaked roofs and front porches, the kind of house a Ford worker in Michigan would live in, houses designed for a cold northern climate, with their tight little rooms set down on the equator. They put in a hospital, a modern American hospital, all the way out there in the trees. They put in a water tower, an electric light, and a power plant, and running water. They built a school, a church, shops, a bakery. And then, because this was to be a proper American town and not merely a work camp, they built the things a town has for its leisure. A cinema, a dance hall, a swimming pool, sidewalks, a golf course in the Amazon. They named the place with a straight face and no small amount of pride Fordlandia, Fordland. And for a moment, from the deck of a boat coming up the Tapajos, it must have been a genuinely astonishing thing to see. Electric lights and a water tower and neat white houses glowing in a clearing, with the endless green dark of the rainforest pressing in on every side. And think, for a moment, about the sheer will it took just to put it there. Everything, every pane of glass, every length of pipe, every bag of cement and every roll of insect screen had to come by ship across the ocean, and then up the Amazon, and then up the Tapajos, hundreds of miles from anywhere, to a clearing that had been solid jungle a season before. It was, in its way, a genuine marvel of organization. No one could accuse Henry Ford of doing things by halves. Whatever else you say about what came next, hold on to this. It was not laziness that failed here, and it was not lack of money, and it was not lack of ambition. It was something much more interesting than any of those. But Henry Ford did not only want to grow rubber in the Amazon. He wanted to grow a certain kind of person there. Ford had firm ideas about how people ought to live, and he was not shy about using his company to enforce them. Back home, he sent inspectors into his workers' houses to make sure they were living cleanly and thriftily the way he approved of. So, of course, in his own town in the jungle, he built exactly the world he believed in. There was to be no alcohol. None. This was the age of prohibition in the United States, and Fordlandia was a dry town by decree, no drinking, no taverns, and no tobacco either. The workers were expected to tend little vegetable gardens. They were encouraged, if you can believe it, to spend their evenings at wholesome American entertainments, poetry readings, sing-alongs, and square dancing. Square dancing. Picture it. Brazilian rubber tappers who had come out of the forest and the river towns, being gently steered toward do-see-do and the American folk dances that Henry Ford personally adored, on the equator in the heat after a day's labor. And the food. Oh, the food. The company canteen served the diet of a Michigan factory town. Oatmeal, canned goods, brown rice, whole wheat rolls. The plain wholesome fare Ford thought was good for a body, to men who wanted the rice and beans and manioc and fish of their own country. You begin to see the shape of the thing. Ford had not come to Brazil to meet Brazil. He had come to plant Michigan there, streets and morals and menu and all, and to trust that the Amazon would simply fall into line, the way a factory floor falls into line. It did not occur to him, it genuinely did not occur to him, that the place and the people might have ideas of their own. There is a detail here I always love to give my students because it says everything. The workers were made to wear numbered badges and punch a time clock, clock in, clock out. Just as in a plant in Detroit, in a part of the world where the day was measured by the sun and the river and the rain. A man tapping rubber in the deep forest could not have cared less what a little metal clock on a company wall had to say about the hour. Ford was not merely trying to grow a crop. He was trying to grow a clock-punching, garden-tending, square-dancing American factory worker out of a Brazilian of the Amazon by decree. And that, my friends, is a far harder thing to manufacture than a Model T. And almost from the beginning, the jungle began, very quietly, to say no. Start with the simplest thing, the site itself. The land they had chosen along the river was hilly and rocky, and in many places poor, not the deep flat soil a plantation wants. And the river that was supposed to be the highway for everything, the Tapajos, dropped low in the dry season, so that at certain times of the year the big supply boats could barely get through. They had picked their spot, this vast estate, without really understanding the ground or the water. Then came the heat and the rain, and above all the diseases. This was deep Amazonia, and it carried malaria and yellow fever and 100 fevers besides. The tidy northern houses trapped the heat. American managers arrived who did not speak a word of Portuguese, and Brazilian workers arrived who did not speak a word of English, and between them stood every possibility of misunderstanding. Men came for the good Ford wages, worked a while, sickened or soured on the rules and drifted away, so that the town could never quite hold on to the workforce it needed. But all of that, the sight, the sickness, the language, the discontent, all of that might have been overcome by money and time and stubbornness, of which Ford had plenty. The thing that could not be overcome, the thing that doomed the whole dream from the first shovel of dirt, was hiding inside the one part everyone thought was the sure thing. It was hiding inside the rubber tree itself. Here is what Henry Ford's managers did not understand, and here is the beating heart of this whole story, so let me slow down and tell it plainly. In the wild Amazon, the rubber tree does not grow in groves. It grows scattered, one tree here, another far away over there, spread thin through the vast forest, with a great deal of distance between them. For a long time people thought that was just an accident of nature. It is not. That spacing is the tree's armor. Because in the Amazon, the rubber tree has an ancient enemy, a fungus, a leaf blight, native to South America, that loves nothing in this world more than the leaves of the Hevea. In the wild, the trees are so far apart that when the blight strikes one, it cannot easily leap to the next. The forest protects the tree by keeping it lonely. It is one of those quiet, elegant arrangements that nature works out over 1,000,000 years and never bothers to explain to anyone. And if you do not know it is there, you will walk straight past it, which is precisely what Ford's men did. Now think about what a plantation is. A plantation is the exact opposite of that. A plantation is thousands of rubber trees planted close together, in tidy rows, all the same, all touching, which, to that hungry native fungus, is not a plantation at all. It is a banquet. It is every meal it could ever dream of, laid end to end, with the aisles removed. The moment Ford's men cleared the forest and planted their neat American rows of rubber trees, they had, without having the faintest idea they were doing it, built the perfect feeding ground for the one disease most eager to destroy them. The blight came, and it spread from crown to crown down those tidy rows like fire down a fuse. The leaves curled and blackened and fell. And there was, in those years, no real cure. And this is the answer to the question I told you to hold on to. Remember, the rubber tree is Brazilian. Why not grow it where it came from? What could be more natural? Here is why. Rubber plantations succeeded gloriously in Asia for one reason above all others. The blight was not there. The seeds that left the Amazon left their ancient enemy behind. In Asia, the rubber tree was a stranger in a land with no predators, and it flourished in rows precisely because nothing there had evolved to eat it. Bring it home to the Amazon, though plant it back in the very forest it came from, and you plant it right on top of the enemy that has been waiting for it for 1,000,000 years. The one place on earth you truly cannot easily grow rubber in a plantation is the place rubber is from. Henry Ford, so sure that nature would reward him for returning the tree to its birthplace, had walked directly into the single trap the whole enterprise could not survive. And while the fungus was quietly eating the trees, The people were reaching the end of their patience with the rules. The breaking point, when it came over something that sounds almost too small to matter. And that is exactly why I love it as a piece of history, because it tells you how much pressure had built up underneath. In December of 1930, the managers decided to change the way the canteen worked. Instead of being served their meal at a table, the workers would now line up, cafeteria style, pick up a tray and serve themselves an efficiency, a modern American touch. To the Brazilian workers, hot, homesick, fed food they disliked, ruled by men who did not understand them and forbidden the ordinary comforts of a drink and a smoke, this new indignity was the last straw. They rose up. They smashed the canteen. They took up whatever was to hand and they wrecked the place. And they went after the managers, who fled. Some of them ran into the jungle. Some of them jumped into boats and pushed off into the river to save themselves, while the workers tore through the town that had been built to civilize them. It took days, and in the end the arrival of the Brazilian army, to put the revolt down and restore the company's order. History has given it a wonderful name, the Breaking Pots Riot, a whole imperial dream of American order, and one of its first great chapters is a mob of furious men smashing the crockery of a self-service canteen. And there is a lovely, human footnote. For all Ford's rules against drinking and vice, men will be men, and downriver from the dry and wholesome town, there grew up a little cluster of bars and brothels and gambling to serve the workers everything Fordlandia forbade. They gave it a name that Henry Ford in far-off Michigan would not have found funny at all. They called it the Island of Innocence. Now, the men who ran Fordlandia were not fools, and they were not quitters. They saw the blight, they saw the bad sight, and they tried to fix it. In the mid-1930s, they all but gave up on the original spot and moved the whole rubber effort downriver to a new and better chosen place, flatter and closer to the town of Santarém, which they called Belterra. And there, with years of hard-won experience, they got smarter. They brought in real plant scientists at last. They tried a clever trick, taking blight-resistant tops from Asian rubber trees and grafting them onto sturdy Amazonian trunks, trying to build a tree that had the strength of home and the defenses of exile. And it worked, a little. Belterra did better than Fordlandia ever had. In its best years, it grew real trees and tapped real rubber. But a little better is not the same as enough. The blight never surrendered. It only had to be fought forever at enormous cost to hold a stalemate. And the trees take years, many years to mature before they give any rubber at all. By the time Ford's plantations might finally have produced something like a real harvest, the whole world had moved. The Second World War came and scrambled everything, and then chemists learned to make rubber out of oil, synthetic rubber, in a factory, the one place of all places where Henry Ford had always been a god. The future of rubber turned out not to be a plantation anywhere. It was a chemical plant, and Fordlandia and even cleverer Belterra were suddenly answers to a question the world had stopped asking. So let us count the cost, gently, the way I always tried to with my students. The Ford Motor Company poured an enormous fortune into that stretch of the Amazon. The figure most often given is something like $20 million of the money of that day, which is a staggering sum, though the exact accounting is argued over. For all of it, the town, the hospital, the water tower, the golf course, the 2 plantations, the 17 years of struggle, Fordlandia produced essentially no rubber for Ford at all. Not in any amount that mattered. It is very nearly true to say that not one Ford automobile ever rolled out of the factory on tires grown in Fordlandia. In 1945, it ended. By then old Henry Ford was fading, and it was his grandson, Henry Ford II, now running the company, who looked at this bleeding wound in the jungle and did the sensible thing at last. He sold the whole concession, the land, the town, everything back to the Brazilian government. The price, the figure that comes down to us, was somewhere around $250,000. Set that beside the 20 million that had gone in. An empire the size of a small country, a slice of America built by the richest man on earth, let go for pennies on the dollar, because in the end the jungle simply would not be told what to do. Henry Ford died 2 years later in 1947, having never once seen the town that bore his name. And the town is still there. That is the strangest part. It did not vanish. It was not swallowed all at once. It just stayed and slowly came apart. A few hundred people live in and around Fordlandia to this day, in the bones of Henry Ford's dream. And if you go there now, you can walk that impossible American street I described at the very beginning, the one that does not belong. The water tower still stands, rusting. The old hospital stands empty, its windows dark. The clapboard houses sag and lean, their porches rotting, vines coming through the walls. There is a fire hydrant in the grass, waiting for a fire truck that is never going to come. It is one of the most haunting places in all of Brazil, and I have always thought it is haunting for a reason that goes far beyond rubber. Because Fordlandia is not really the story of a failed plantation. It is the story of a certain idea about the world, standing in ruins in the rain. So here, my friend, is the part they leave out of the schoolbook. Here is what I really wanted you to carry away. Henry Ford was, arguably, the greatest master of control the modern world had ever produced. His entire genius was the genius of the assembly line, of taking something complicated and messy and breaking it into simple, identical, repeatable steps that any part could perform, so that the whole thing marched forward exactly as planned. Standardize, simplify, command. It made him one of the richest men who ever lived. And it worked so completely for so long that he came to believe it would work on anything, on a country, on a people, on a rainforest. But a rainforest is not an assembly line. It is the most complicated living thing on the face of the earth. Millions of years of tangled, patient arrangement. Every creature and fungus and tree in some ancient bargain with every other. A system so deep that we still do not fully understand it. And you cannot standardize that. You cannot simplify it into rows and command it to obey. The very habit of mind that had conquered the factory, flatten it, order it, control it, was the exact habit of mind that guaranteed he would fail in the forest. His greatest strength, carried into the wrong place, became the instrument of his defeat. And notice this is the part that gives me a little shiver, even now, that the jungle never raised an army against him. It never declared war. It never even seemed to resist. It simply went on being what it had always been, complicated beyond his understanding, patient beyond his lifetime, obeying laws far older than any he could write. The trees kept quietly dying of a sickness he did not know was there. The river kept quietly falling in the dry season. The people kept quietly slipping back to their own food and their own drink and their own way of counting the hours. Ford brought all his money and all his certainty, and the Amazon did not so much defeat him as decline to notice him. And that, in the end, was defeat enough. And that is why I could never quite let this story go, because it is not really about Henry Ford or about rubber or even about Brazil. It is about all of us, because we all do it. We look at something we do not understand, a place, Another culture, another person, a wild and complicated life. And the temptation always is to reach for our own tidy rows, to assume that our way of doing things, the way that worked so well for us back home, must simply be the right way everywhere for everyone, and that reality will fall gratefully into line once we impose it. And reality, like that jungle, so often just quietly waits and does what it was always going to do. So let me leave you with the question I used to leave with my students, and I truly want your answer down in the comments because I read them. Think of a time you were absolutely certain you were right about something, a place, a plan, a person, and you pushed your own tidy order onto it, and reality pushed back and taught you the lesson Henry Ford paid $20 million to learn in the Amazon. What was your Fordlandia? Tell me honestly. I would love to know. My name is Joaquim. Thank you for pulling up a chair. And the next time someone tells you that money and certainty can bend the whole world to your will, you can tell them about a rusting water tower and a golf course, deep in the rainforest, where the richest man on earth once tried to teach the jungle a lesson and got schooled instead. Until next time.